Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brian. Today, we are continuing my top 10 lists of 2024, and this is a list I feel like the most people look forward to. That's my top 10 rare and limited releases of 2024. Now, like I mentioned in the other videos, but you've probably already seen it, come over here and you can see my ground rules of why I've placed certain things in what lists. I don't think that's super needed here. I think we all know the rare and limited generally are the more limited big six releases or the annual releases that people generally expect to see. However, there were a couple things in this list I was surprised to see. While I have it here, jump down below, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Help me continue to grow the channel in 2025, and let me know what your favorite rare or limited whiskey that you were able to try in 2024 was. No honorable mentions are going into this list. We're just gonna rapid fire go through them. However, I do wanna mention, you all know if you follow my social content, whether it's here, whether it's over on Instagram, I did have King of Kentucky this year, I did have George C. Stagg this year, I did have William LaRue Weller this year. I was not able to revisit any of those for this list for consideration in the blinds to put forward on this list today. So know that they're not in here, and I'm a little bummed about that because I really would have liked to see how some of those were placing. And I'll talk a little bit about that more probably a little later on. The one thing I did realize I do want to mention about these whiskeys going into the blinds are that they were all notably intense, meaning their noses were fantastic in the blinds. Their palates were all super viscous and incredibly flavorful, and the finishes were super long lasting. Making a blind, I felt, of these whiskeys only pretty difficult because you had these really powerful flavors going from one pour to another where you had to have a lot of separation and sparkling water and stuff in between to try and separate out their flavors. And for that reason, I feel like any of these could probably move to other positions in the list, given day or something like that. But this is how I have them ranked right now. These are all really enjoyable, powerful whiskeys. I think this is a good showing of the distilleries putting their best foot forward into a limited release. But I don't necessarily think that means like a tasting of these alone would make an exceptional night. I think it would make a palate overload as it did in the blind tastings for me. I feel like these are the ones that you set up a night towards, that this is the thing that you crack as a special moment that you sit with for a long time, that you share with important people, because from blinding, I'm realizing the palates just kind of command that. They command attention or time or just showing this huge power that I don't feel like the whiskeys in the other lists showed the same way. Let's go ahead and dive into number 10. I think number 10 could surprise a whole lot of people. Coming in 10th on my top rare and limited whiskeys of 2024 is this Old Stubborn batch. This is batch 2, I believe. This was 10-year, 11-year, and 12-year-old pot still straight bourbons. I believe the first release they put out was a wheated bourbon. This one is a rye bourbon, and I feel like it gives you all of the flavors that you were looking for in a mature, just elegant, old tasting whiskey. Sure, there might be a little bit of funk on the first sip, and I thought that also on the wheated, but I thought there was more of that to the wheated bourbon, less of that to this one, and I feel like once you get past the first kind of sip or two, you really start to soak into its flavors. Rich, caramel, cakey, brown sugar syrup on the nose, big blast of brown sugar and oak on the palate, spiced apples, dark-leaning kind of medicinal type fruit. I feel like it kind of has some turkey-y kind of vibes to it. It was just really enjoyable. This scored great in the blind, and one that I really enjoyed coming back to earlier in the year and still coming back to. Number 10 on my top rare and limited list, Old Stubborn Batch 2. Number 9 on my top 10 rare and limited releases of the year is the Four Roses. This is the Father's Day release that they had. Now, this is a single barrel expression. This one is not open. I have others. They are open. They're just not here. But this is one that I try to triangulate every time Four Roses does these special limited editions. I always try and figure out, do I put the limited edition in the list or do I put one of the single barrels in the list? Maybe in some instances, both could go. But you know that I wasn't as big of a fan of the LE this year, but I was a big fan of this one. This is a different barrel than the one that I would put, as high in the list as I could. The barrel that I liked was 3L or 6L. They all came from the 6th floor, even though some of them were mistakenly printed as the 3rd floor of these barrels. But these 16-year-old OESVs are just some of my favorite flavors to find in Four Roses. The interesting thing is all of these are coming in at or like really close to hazmat. So you have to really like powerful whiskeys and you have to really like Four Roses. The barrel we put in the blinds was O, and I feel like it was not necessarily the strongest barrel that I had personally had in the year. L, in my limited barrels that I did have this year, maybe 3, 4, 5, L had been my favorite barrel that we had tried, and I didn't have it to put in these blinds, but do know I think it would probably fare better. What I had mentioned about the L barrels, it reminded me of the things that I liked about the previous 16-year OESV that they put out in recent years. If you go back through my top list, you've probably seen that one, where it just gives you all of some of my favorite flavors that Four Roses offers. Really enjoyable caramels, really good oak, incredible mouthfeel, a lot of accompanying spice. It's what makes Four Roses to me. The only knock I would say about this product, given certain palates, is that it is really, really intense. You have to be ready for intensity or proof it down a little bit. Sometimes I come to this pour and I'm not ready. I'm not ready for a whiskey that is that thick, that heavy. And I feel like it did stick out on the table for the blinds even because of how intense it was, even though there are other things that had high proof as well. Coming in 9th place on my top 10 rare and limiteds, Four Roses Father's Day 2024 release. I was really excited to see this whiskey do pretty well on this list. It's a little bit different from some of the others. 8th place on my top rare and limited list, this Penelope Estate Private Select 9-year. This might be a little bit more available to some. It might not necessarily be the rarest, but Penelope came out with this estate collection, and I've enjoyed everything I've had so far. 10-year single barrels, the 11-year wheat whiskey. We also had it in this tasting as well, but it wasn't in the top 10. And then this one right here, I feel like has been a softer profile, but an enjoyable profile. There's some people who probably won't like this profile and how timid it is. It is 101.2 proof, so it's a little on the softer side, but I feel like it rewards you with kind of a mix of like the sweet candied MGP notes, but with the silkiness of like maybe an Elmer T. Lee or something like that. Kiwi, pink starburst, thick caramel syrup on the nose, big red fruit, strawberry, really effervescent mouthfeel, which is one of the unique qualities about it, especially in the blind tasting. It had kind of like a tea-like softness or tannin to it. I feel like you could probably tell that it's MGP. It might hide itself a little bit when you're tasting with other things, but this is a really easy, enjoyable, nice whiskey to bring out with people if you need something a little on the softer side, a little less on the cask strength side. 8th place on my top rare and limited list, this Penelope Estate Private Select 9-year. This next whiskey is another one that stood out in the tastings because of what it was, but I don't think that should exclude it for what it is. It's the oddball of this tasting. This is the Westward Whiskey Milestone. The Westward Milestone is an American single malt, and if you have not had Westward before, they're one of my favorite American single malt producers this year because they have these stone fruit-like sweetness. Is really kind of fun. It's a different take, I feel like, than some of the others in their softness of flavors for American single malts, where some of the other ones are more chocolatey, sometimes more scotchy, or just a little bit more corky. Now, don't get me wrong, this has plenty of malt. It has these kind of like beer malt type flavor vibes to it, especially hanging with the other pours, but it's got depth to it, it's got complexity to it, it's got nuance. I said it when I talked about it earlier in the year, whether it was on Instagram only or it was a video or something here, but this is my favorite American single malt this year. It's definitely my favorite release that Westward has put out. There's green apple, there's juicy peach, cantaloupe-like notes on the nose. Again, chocolate and these kind of beer malt-like flavors kick in on the palate, but the palate is intense enough that it hangs with the other whiskeys we saw on the list. It's almost like honey-dipped slices of grapefruit. Really, really unique offering. If you're one who hasn't dipped into American single malt, this might not necessarily be the jump for you to make, but Westward has a lot of whiskeys that have similar flavors to this. This is just kind of their excellent step forward. Coming in 7th place on my top rare and limited list, Westward Whiskey Milestone. Coming in 6th place on my top rare and limited list happens to be this year's Coy Hill from Jack Daniel's. This is Barrel House 8. It is 134.7 proof. This was the sample bottle that they had sent out. I had another one that I also thought was solid. And the reason I really wanted to put this one in the blinds this year is because we didn't have a King of Kentucky. And the reason I say that is because throughout the year, my previous review that I did about King of Kentucky was talking about a little bit of disappointment, a little bit of disjointed flavors that I felt like it offered this year. However, I feel like the flavors that King has, even if it's an off year like I felt like this year was, are still better than a majority of whiskeys. So if this one blinded in 6th place, I feel as if King of Kentucky would have performed stronger had it been able to be on this list, but it wasn't. And this is Coy Hill. I was a big fan of the previous releases of Coy Hill, their single barrels, their small batch, these incredible, dark, rich flavors coming out of Tennessee. Even here, voluptuous palate, fruit candy, long-lasting oak, almost a blueberries and cream-like sweetness as well that lingered on the palate. What I thought was unique about this one, compared to the Four Roses, is they were both high-proof whiskeys, but this one gave all of the voluptuousness, the richness, the intensity, but it didn't stick out the same way the Four Roses did. And I think that maybe that has to do with how much rye is in the Four Roses, or maybe the Four Roses just isn't as polished of a whiskey as this one is. However, the Coy Hill has continuously shown well year over year as being maybe not findable, but for those who do, an affordable, exciting whiskey, and changes our mind not only about what Jack Daniel's can put out, which over the last couple years has increasingly shown us that they can put out some incredible whiskeys and projects, but showing us that you can find really enjoyable whiskeys in some cases and not have to spend $300 in order to do so. 6th on my list of top 10 rare and limited releases, Coy Hill. The top 5 on this list had me tasting back and forth, I feel like a bunch of times before and after the blinds to really figure out where I wanted to put them on the list. And this one really surprised me. Coming in 5th place on my top rare and limited list is the Heaven Hill 18-year from their Heritage Collection. The reason this one surprised me is because you might remember earlier in the year, I talked about not really enjoying this flavor profile as much. I had put it up against the William Heaven Hill 17 from last year, 120 proof. This one is coming in at 120 proof, so they're similar ages, they're similar proof points, exact proof points, and I thought that this one just was rolled off, softer. You know, it had big shoes to fill from the Heaven Hill 17 that so many people acclaimed to be such a fantastic whiskey of the year in years past. And this one just seemed too soft, too on the nose for Heaven Hill profile. But I thought that it made sense to revisit at the end of the year, and boy, am I glad that I did. As much as I wanted to knock this whiskey, the palate scored one of the highest palate scores in my entire blind flight, and that's got to say something. It was huge, intense, and powerful. At 120 proof, it was thick, it was potent, it had a lot of age showing, as I would expect at 18 years old, with deep fruit and cream-like notes. A surprising bottle to me to throw back on the list. Coming in at 5th place, Heaven Hill 18 Heritage Collection. Now, this was another one that I didn't initially have going into the tastings for the end of the year, but my buddy Scott had this in his end of the year list, and it made me think, hey, maybe I need to try and find one and revisit this. Coming in 4th on my top rare and limited releases this year is Michter's 10 Bourbon. Now, this one is barrel 24A0130. Michter's 10 was a fantastic whiskey last year. It had these dark, perfumed, powerful notes. And if you remember from my rye list, the M10 rye this year also did really well, being this big, viscous rye, even at its low proof. This is coming in at 94.4 proof, but has this power and intensity and flavor profile that obviously beat out a whole lot of things in the tasting. It was a beautiful whiskey. And this bottle specifically, I feel like, though, had unusual sweet candy-like notes that were not what I expected from M10. I think that's why it threw me off in the blinds. I didn't know that I had no reason to think that this was Michter's 10-year bourbon. But those flavors also didn't remind me of the barrels of Michter's 10 that I had from 2023. Blue, purple fruits, a lot of kind of berries and sweet plump notes, great creaminess, a little bit of honey, and really pretty oak. Not that this is an easy bourbon to find, but some of the other bourbons on this list are much harder and more expensive to find. An incredible showing for this, and I feel like this could be a lot of people's bourbon of the year. Relatively easy to find if you go by the distillery, or they're not all that expensive if you have to pay up at a store or something like that. Not suggesting that you do that, but I was surprised to see this one perform so well. And for some people, if you want to discredit the ones in front of this list because of cost or availability, I could see that being a very valid judgment. Performing super well this year. fourth place in my top rare and limited, Michter's 10-year bourbon. I feel like pitchforks could come out at me based on where I have these next three, but does it really matter? I mean, do these lists at all really matter? I think in order just to be consistent with myself and taste these year over year, maybe for that. But if these are towards the top of the list and if these triangulate with other people, I think that we can safely say they're really enjoyable bourbons. Coming in third place on my top rare and limited list this year is the Russell's 15. Now I know it's not first place. I'm sorry about that. However, my experience with Russell's 15 this year has not been the best, and I think there's other people who can relate to that. I think that Russell's 15 year on most of my revisits hasn't actually given me the enjoyability on flavor that I had in the very beginning when I did my video, or just that I look for in a whiskey. Now, while it has the old funk, the medicinal type notes, the things that maybe you would expect on the nose and kind of going in on the palate too, intense whiskey, deep fruit notes, lots of cherry, gobs of old age, and layers of complex and nuanced spices, all those things depending on the drinker, could be great, could be not what you're looking for. This whiskey to me tastes best the longer it sits in the glass. The more it sits in the glass, the more it opens up. I mean, this is a pour that if you sit with it for a night with some friends or whatever, you are going to have an expansive, ever-changing whiskey, and that is very commendable. There are not necessarily a lot of flaws I can pull out about this for what it is. However, to me, on multiple revisits through the year, there's a weird note to the finish that truly kept me from connecting with this whiskey the same way I felt like other people connected to it. That might just be my palate, but tasting with my friend Nick, I think that he also had similar experiences with this. And I do know from other people that I have seen talk on the internet, other people don't think that this whiskey is all that. So know that I am one of those tasters who have had mixed experiences with this whiskey. Objectively, if I pull myself back and I analyze it for its notes and what it is and like what all it presents, it is a really, really great whiskey, and that's why I have it as high on this list this year. But do know that it is not necessarily my preferred one, and I'm going to keep going to it. I'm going to keep trying to see. This is a new bottle. We've been working on my friend Nick's bottle that he recently brought to a share. It's almost gone, so we're going to have to pop another one here soon. But I want to continue to try this whiskey and see if I can connect to it a little bit better than others. But personally, I think I prefer the Russell's 13 release more than this one. That might be another video of continuing to go back and forth on those. I'm not going to keep rating the conversation. Number 3 on my top rare and limited releases is the Russell's 15 year. Number 2 on my rare and limited releases came in as a late submission, but one that I couldn't deny how enjoyable it was. This happens to be the Watchill 20 year. Now, this was really hard for me to figure out where this was going to place on my list because this is an incredible whiskey. I feel like this very easily could be my whiskey of the year. When I first tasted it, I said, this is the best whiskey I have tasted all year long. Let me bring out a couple of caveats. This was a single barrel expression. There were only 102 bottles available, and its MSRP is $900. Those are all very price prohibitive for a lot of people. Now, I don't take those into consideration for these lists generally. I've mentioned that before, not necessarily availability, not really price. However, I felt like what I love about this one is I feel like it has so much flavor, age, nuance without being over oaked. The only kind of little bit of knock about it is if you're not ready for this potent pour, that I feel like it's got a little tightness in its flavor. And if you're not proofed or ready, or you've had a lot of powerful whiskeys ahead of it, it could alter how you experience this whiskey. While this could easily be my whiskey of the year, like the Russell's 13, this is an occasion pour. This is something that I feel like if I'm not in the right mood, I won't experience it the way that I experience it saying it's the best whiskey of the year. Does that make sense at all? Sometimes you come to a whiskey and you say, I'm actually not in the mood for this one to taste the way that it tastes its fullest. I feel like a sign of a great whiskey is one that almost anytime you come to it, it's going to show its cards And it's a beautiful, well-done whiskey that you want to keep revisiting. Not that it will taste the same every time, but it will give you the same, it will unlock the same experience every time. And while this is a ramped up, proofed up, intense version of some of the flavors that were in my number one, I feel like because of that intensity that you have to be ready for, this is coming in number two. Number two on my rare and limited releases of the year, Watchill 20 year. And that brings us to number one. Number one on my top rare and limited releases this year is the Old Fitzgerald 13-year release. There are so many good things that I can say about this whiskey. I was fearful that even at its 100 proof, it would not be able to hang with all the other whiskeys that we saw on this list. But this one is the highest scoring palette that I had in my list. It is continuously always impressing me with its nuance, with its flavor. It's like from the first time I tried it, I said, this is gonna be whiskey of the year. And there were several things that gave it a run for its money. Russell's 15, that Watchill went back and forth because I feel like the Watchill proper gives, maybe if you were to take any knocks against this on proof, or maybe it's a little soft, the finish is a little short, the Watchill proper improves on those things and still has a similar flavor camp. And that's why I wrestle with these two so much. But this one had released a lot more bottles. This one has given more people a chance to access it. While it's not an easy bottle to purchase secondary or anything like that, I feel like this was reasonable to high for the price that it was, but I think that the flavors that you get in this, are rewarded for, and I feel like every time you visit it, you're gonna have something special. Not only that, this is a beautiful bottle. With it being 100 proof, that means not only is it a special bottle for you, but it's more likely that it will be a special bottle for other people that you taste with because it has that lower proof, that lower barrier of entry without sacrificing incredible, incredible flavor. It's sugary, it's sweet, it has this beautiful antique-like oak note on the nose, a beautiful fruited palate. I'm talking purple fruits, blue, red, every type of fruit that you could look for, creamy, pie-like, sweetened, sugary. You're gonna find here. This sums up so many types of notes that I have picked out about things I enjoy in all of my other lists, from candied little spice fruit notes in the Ryes to some of the beautiful kind of soft floral-like notes in the Still Austins, all types of things. You can find those types of flavors here with fantastic oak. And again, this is a 13-year old release. The thing that was unique about this one is that it has been tanked for so long and they brought it back out. So this also just has this interesting story, nostalgia about being a whiskey that is not necessarily from this time. It's a snapshot from some other time that we get to experience in 2024, 25 and beyond. And I think if you know me and how I look at pours too, King of Kentucky does that for me too. It's like a flavor profile that is it's just different from other whiskeys. And I felt like I couldn't get away from that all year long. Number one on my top rare and limited releases of 2024, the Old Fitzgerald 13-year. Thanks so much for tuning into another video, guys. Hope it was insightful, informational. Again, I'd love to hear from you all what your favorite rare limiteds were down below in the comments. I do have a couple more lists that I want to put out. That includes my, I did a video about more readily available whiskeys, or the more accessible whiskeys that run all different types of price points and stuff like that. But I do have an everyday bourbon list. It might not be numbered. It's just my 10 favorite everydays. And then I have my American whiskey / not whiskey. So American single malts, rums, all those things. I might take a bit of a break because these videos have been a little bit intense to make and before those come out. But in the coming weeks or in a week or two, you might see those lists come out. Thanks as always for tuning into another video, guys. Hope it was insightful, informational. That's it for me today. And until next time, we'll see you all later.